Over the course of these 2 videos, we've laid out a high-resolution near-term blueprint for developing the moon, for going from nothing to not just some outpost, but to the point where we are able to actually build habitats on the moon out of steel created from lunar regolith. Now I'm going to attempt the impossible and try to calculate how much this strategy would cost to underscore its viability in concrete terms. This may sound like a boring topic, but this video is worth your time and attention because it will illustrate just how close we are to taking that first monumental step towards a future in which we inhabit a solar system spanning civilization. But take that hope with a grain of salt because this is going to be some pretty serious back of the envelope educated guesstimating. The first thing we need to estimate are our research and development costs, R&D. Up front, we are not looking at the R&D cost of developing a Starship/Lunarship type launch vehicle. These are separate because while being able to develop the moon does depend on this technology existing, this technology isn't being developed with the sole intent of developing the moon. Starship's use as a vehicle for building out and maintaining the Starlink constellation alone is justification enough for its development, not even counting NASA and other government or military contract missions, or the entire private market earning potential, or any of our lunar development use cases. Caravels weren't developed to cross the Atlantic, they were developed to sail down the coast of Africa. But once they existed, they made crossing the Atlantic possible. Same with Starship-like launch vehicles. So then what exactly are we researching and developing? 2 vehicles, the process of burying a lunar ship under 3 meters of regolith using one of these vehicles, lower gravity adjustments to the steelmaking electrolysis cell, vacuum steel casting, and, biggest of them all, the lunar structure construction methods. Building big steel boxes and big holes on the moon may seem simple enough, but you can be sure there will be lots of devils found in those details. Usually, to estimate R&D cost, a team of analysts are paid a few $100,000 to perform a deep investigation, typically taking several months, but this analysis always takes longer and cost overruns are to be expected. And so the cost analysis costs more than originally expected, and when it's finally complete, they come to some conclusion that a project will take X amount of time and money. But that project always takes longer than X as cost overruns are to be expected, and so the cost is more than the cost analysis originally expected. So a performance review is initiated by a team of analysts who are paid a few $100,000 to perform a deep investigation, typically taking about a year, but this investigation always takes longer and cost overruns are to be expected. But I don't need to justify my MBA-induced $50,000 student loan indebted father disappointing existence, so we can just take a shortcut and just estimate R&D cost as a historic average. So let me just do about 5 to 6 hours of research, combing through government accountability office reports, grant awards, SBIR contracts, making a list, checking it twice, converting every amount to 2019 dollars, and ta-da! Okay, so the list actually isn't that long. I was going for at least 100 items spread across as many industries as possible, but it turns out most companies aren't actually that happy to publish R&D numbers, I guess because they want to keep secrets from their competitors, or maybe just from me. So most of these are government numbers or values revealed in court documents, but I think it's good enough for our ballpark estimate. I could make it longer, but With 28 items, we get an average yearly cost of $1.658 billion, with an average project duration of 8.1 years, for an expected R&D cost of $13.265 billion. But this is not a good model because things cost less to develop when they're no longer cutting edge. There's a lot of basic research needed between 0 and 0.5. Progress isn't linear. There's a steep initial learning curve. Saturn V development began just 5 years after we had put a single satellite into orbit. The Manhattan Project began just barely 3 years after fission was even discovered. We are much further down the development track than that and aren't inventing anything from scratch. Almost everything we are using is derived from existing technology. The most cutting-edge, ambitious thing is the excavator, but excavators and lunar rovers already exist. We are just combining the technology. So let's remove the extreme outliers like the Manhattan Project and the Saturn V and the International Space Station, which is the most expensive thing ever built in human history, by the way, mostly because the only thing more irresponsible with money than the government is 15 governments. And also, I didn't include anything Boeing, which you won't question if you know anything about Boeing. And our new numbers are much more favorable, with an average yearly cost of $513 million and an average project duration of 7.66 years, for a total R&D cost of $3.929 billion. We might as well just round up to $4 billion over 8 years. So our costs were basically cut in half, but our time remained the same. Now that we have our R&D cost, it's just a simple matter of adding up an estimate for all that equipment we just researched and developed. How much does a lunar ship cost? Well, in this video, we suggested a lunar ship build cost of $50 million plus a lunar launch cost of $80 million over 5 launches, resulting in a lunar launch cost of $100 million. For the ships turned shelters that are not returning, their usable lifespan is not 5 launches, but rather just 1. It might be possible to do the retrofitting necessary after it has already flown 4 or more missions, thus distributing the build cost. However, let's assume this is not the case and it eats up the entire build cost on its first flight to the moon, where it will stay. Also, since it doesn't need to return to Earth, it would need less fuel, and so its flight cost would be less than $80 million. However, we also won't factor this in, just to remain on the high end of estimates. So we get a lunar ship turned outpost cost of $130 million per unit. This is not its value, just its cost to build and launch to the moon. We are maintaining its value by reusing it as a structure rather than a reusable launch vehicle. So we retrofitted, dropped, flipped, and buried 3 ships. That's $390 million. We also transported 2 electrolysis reactors with other equipment on 2 different trips. And we transported humans to the moon once in our journey so far, the engineers who constructed the base but had to leave after 2 weeks due to radiation exposure. After this, another crew will come, and these will be the ones to furnish the place, and since they can shelter in the now built radiation protected outpost, they can stay longer and will oversee the installment of the reactors and the machine shop and whatnot. So let's add a second trip. Then let's assume all this takes place over the course of 1 year, and that there is at least 1 crew change after 6 months, so adding another trip for 3 total. Then let's add a 4th trip for margin's sake, maybe a crew resupply mission or something. So we have 2 electrolysis reactor payloads plus 4 human-oriented trips for $600 million. Our nuclear reactor cost is $10 million, but that was delivered aboard one of these ships turned shelters. To find out how much the 2 chromium anode reactors would cost, I was going to compare them to the cost of similar reactors used in industrial aluminum production, but I couldn't find this information without paying something like $2,000 for a report. But a quick look at industrial furnace costs shows that they're typically between $10,000 and $30,000. I saw nothing over $500,000, so it's probably safe to assume these reactors will cost tens of thousands rather than millions, which makes them basically a rounding error. But to be safe, let's just say they'll cost $1 million each. This should also be more than enough of a margin to cover the cost of all the auxiliary equipment that comes with them, the caster being the most expensive. So add another $2 million to our scorecard. So we have 3 ships turned shelters for $390 million, 2 reactor payloads plus 4 human trips equals 6 flights for $600 million, 1 nuclear reactor plus 2 electrolysis reactors for another $12 million. Total, $1.002 billion. So $1 billion plus our R&D cost of $4 billion for a total of $5 billion over the course of 8 to 10 years. While $5 billion may seem expensive to a peasant like you, let me put it into perspective. We can gain the ability to develop the moon for the same price as 45 F-35 fighter jets, or the Seattle Seahawks, or 25 Marvel movies, or just 2% of the money the government wasted in 2022 alone. For comparison, the US government wasted $247 billion in 2022, mostly due to accounting errors. The Department of Defense currently fields 450 F-35s, NASA spent $11.8 billion to develop the SLS, and the Pentagon spends $500 million a year to run Guantanamo Bay, $13 million per prisoner. And as of 2023, humanity has spent about $6.4 billion to produce 32 Marvel movies, with 12 more in development. So $5 billion to begin developing the moon is not much, all things considered. So thanks to Jonathan Crone for becoming this channel's newest Patreon member and getting us just that much closer to our $5 billion goal. Every little bit counts. In the next episode, we'll look at how we can get stupid filthy rich juicing dumb lunar tourists for everything they've got, so like and subscribe and stay tuned.